Hello, everyone. Ted Lacksone and the Country Thinker here, bringing you another episode of The Eagle Has Crashed. Now, I've got a couple updates here. Podcasts in the future are going to be at tedlacksonen.com, which is going to be my author-specific blog. A lot of readers have complained that the Country Thinker is too all over the place and so on and so forth, and I tend to agree with them, so I'm going to put author-related work there. I will post a link each weekend at the Country Thinker, so you can still come here or you can go directly. So even with that, I'm still going to try and narrow the focus of the Country Thinker, but I don't need to get into the details here because you're probably interested in the book, possibly more than the blog itself. Now, getting back to the story, last month, which was February of 2030, which wrapped up, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont seceded. We found out the Winter Olympics were sparsely attended due to safety concerns. Kevin Davis is bartering his labor for goods since inflation is starting to take off in the United States. And Dylan Johansson is being wooed by Nate North and the brewing secessionist movement in Ohio. So, without further ado, let's get to the next episode of the story, March of 2030. Benny Johansson sat in a leather desk chair with her long legs curled up underneath her. Her home office light was off, and her face was illuminated by the glow of her laptop. Her husband's tall, broad-shouldered silhouette appeared at the door. "Working late, honey?" Dylan asked. "Just looking at our finances and doing our taxes," she replied. "How are things looking?" he asked. "It isn't pretty." Benny rubbed her forehead. "I don't know what else to say, but we're out of money. You're out of work because you got disbarred. I lost my butt on the OAR bankruptcy, and now paying work is hard to find because no one has any money. It's amazing that there are so many bankruptcies going on, but a bankruptcy attorney can't make a living. My overhead costs are higher than the fees I've been able to collect. My practice is burning cash right now. What are we going to do? I think I'm going to close my practice with Wells and Whitehurst and go solo. Will that help? I can offload most of my overhead expenses, except my share of the office lease. Is there any way you can negotiate it down? Not a chance. Most of the other partners are hurting as well." She drummed her fingers on the table. "And what sucks is that we're about out of savings. We blew a bunch of it for the down payment on this house, along with my buy-in at the firm. My share of the lease alone will eat whatever's left." "Well, you've got a cheap secretary and legal assistant standing here." Betty laughed. "You'll look cute in a skirt." I've always wondered what it would be like to get taken advantage of by my boss," Dylan said with a grin. "This could be fun." "I'm glad we can still laugh, even now." Dylan sighed. "Okay, we can try to run your practice from here and see if we can make a little money that way. But what about the checkbook? How bad is it?" "It's bad. Practically speaking, we should stop paying our mortgage so we can keep some cash around to take care of basic necessities." Dylan rubbed his forehead. "A pair of attorneys who worked hard and played by the rules are going to lose their house." "Yeah, I know. We saved and put 20% down. I mean, we worked really hard to get where we are. But now the economy and the housing market are in the toilet, and our mortgage is underwater. When we lose this house, it'll sell for less than we owe, so we'll have to pay to make up the difference." "How are the taxes looking?" Benny shook her head. "Awful. We're going to have to pay about $7,000 in capital gains taxes in investments that lost money." "Excuse me?" "Take the Toyota stock I bought before we got married. I got it for about $25,000 in 2015, and we sold it last year for $34,000, so we have to pay capital gains on $9,000. The problem is we needed it to go up to $36,000 to stay even with inflation, so we actually lost $2,000. Good Lord, that doesn't seem fair." "Well, thank the Fed for artificial inflation and Congress for not indexing capital gains to the inflation rate. I half wish we had blown it all instead of wasting it in the stock market." "That sure seems like that's what Congress and the Fed wanted us to do. We could have partied our tails off and we wouldn't be any worse off than we are now." I can't believe I regret that we were responsible with our finances. Benny looked back to the monitor. Well, we're about to find out what it's like to have money get really, really tight. If we lose it all, we can always live in Mom and Dad's basement. Their house is paid off. Benny closed her eyes and laughed. Let me talk to the bank tomorrow and talk to them about our situation. As much as I love your parents, they drive me crazy. He leaned against the door jamb. Yeah, me too. Tom Calhoun tiptoed across the crunchy early March grass of his rural Licking County home. Hazlitt, the Calhoun's German Shepherd, named for Henry Hazlitt, an Austrian school economist Tom admired, trotted along with his tail raised. Tom motioned for the dog to stay, and Hazlitt sat down on the grass at attention. Tom slowly opened the side door of a small heated greenhouse and quietly crept in. Megan had her back to him and was leaning over a flat of vegetable plants in faded overalls, her black hair pulled into a ponytail. Tom snuck up beside her and tickled beneath each of her underarms. Megan screeched and leapt up, sending her watering can splashing to the floor. Jesus, Tom, I hate it when you do that. He smiled. I just can't resist. He looked to the rows of flats. How are things coming along? Perfect. Cabbage, Brussels sprouts, peppers, you name it. They're all up. Cool. It looks like it will be another productive year in Calhoun land. Not if my husband keeps interrupting me, it won't, she said with a fake smile. Is there something you wanted to tell me? Yes, he said, with an ear-to-ear smile that showed his crooked and chipped teeth. The stock market just fell below 10,000. Megan's eyes opened wide and she put a hand over her mouth. Holy shit! It was over 40,000 just a year ago. Tom threw his hands up in the air. Did your man hook you up with good info or what? I bet you're glad I made you get all your money out of the market last spring. Boy, am I ever. You know what else? Megan squinted. No. That means I won our bet that the market would fall below 10,000 before summer. She put her hands on her hips. And I suppose you intend to collect immediately. Of course. She held up her hands. Can't it wait, Tom? I'm filthy. I like my girl a little dirty. You're a piece of work, honey. She laughed. You know, Tom, you're probably the only man in the country getting any action these days. I doubt it. There's always action going on. With things as bad as they are, she said, I doubt many women are in the mood. Who said anything about being in the mood? Sex is part of the economy, and I'm guessing that the market for it is heating up. Excuse me? Women may not be in the mood, but you know that men are. Of course. As things go down the tubes, you'll see an increase in market activity. You know, a hand job for a loaf of bread, that sort of thing. That's disgusting. Tom shrugged. Maybe, but don't think it didn't happen in the Great Depression. And nowadays girls aren't nearly as prissy. With the law of supply and demand at work, girls are going to trade it cheap by historical standards. You could say that while inflation is taking off for most goods and services since the Department of Currency opened last month, the sex market is going to see significant deflationary pressures due to oversupply. Megan closed her blue eyes and shook her head. My word, you are a kook. Tom shrugged his shoulders. With unemployment high, you can expect a lot of women to seek temporary work in the world's oldest profession. That's all I'm saying. Maybe. Anyhow, about our bet? Later, Tom. I most definitely am not in the mood now. Robin the Hood crossed the front porch of the multi-unit home where Grace Mercer resided, carrying a large cardboard box in his arms. He pulled open the screen door with a finger and then turned around and opened the heavy wooden door with a bump of his rump. He walked to the door of Unit 1A, set down the box, and knocked on the door. Tasha Whitaker opened the door slightly and looked over the safety chain. Hey, Sean, she said, as she undid the chain and opened the door. Hey, baby, got your order. Cool, the fridge is almost empty. She walked back into the apartment and quickly returned with a thick roll of bills that she handed to him. He stuffed the bills in his rear pocket, picked up the box, and handed it to her. It's a pleasure doing business with you, he said with a golden grin. Now when are you going to let me take you out on a date? Tasha was laughing when the two were startled by the yipping of a dog. Mr. Fluffy had his head rammed between the oak spindles of the railing of the second-floor landing. Grace Mercer appeared, carrying her umbrella like a club. She stomped down the steps with her schnauzer yipping behind her. I gotta go, baby, Sean said. Grandma's got her panties in a bunch. He headed for the door without looking to Mercer. Mercer stopped at the bottom and shook her umbrella. If I catch you round here, young man, I'm going to give you a thumping you won't forget. Sean dismissed her with a wave and continued out the door. Mercer completed her descent and turned to Tasha, who was leaning against her doorframe. You've got to have better sense than that, hanging around with a troublemaker. I told you before he ain't nothing but a common thief, and you're going to find yourself in big trouble if the law catches on. But me and my little girl's got to eat, Miss Grace. There's no way I could get by with prices like they are. So you're buying stuff from a hoodlum who's driving out to the country and stealing it? That's a bad way to be. God's going to frown on it. If you need help, why don't you just ask? You're just a part-time secretary at a church, and your Social Security checks don't come half the time. How are you going to help me? Oh, I get by just fine, darling, and I don't break the law to do it. I'm warning you, dealing with that fool's going to bring you heartaches in the end. I'm a big girl, Miss Grace. I got it under control. Mercer shook her head and sighed. That's what they all say. But I'm warning you, I catch that hoodlum around here again, I'm going to give him the thrashing he deserves. I bet you will, Tasha said with a smile. Mercer scowled. Come on, Mr. Fluffy, let's go to the park. Be careful out there, Tasha warned. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. I'll be all right. I got God on my side. Yeah? That's what they all say. The president opened the door to the White House bedroom and peered in. He saw the First Lady sitting up in bed, reading a heavy, leather-bound volume. Maynard smiled. It's 2 a.m., Amy. What are you still doing up? She shrugged her thin shoulders. Oh, I don't know. My husband is up working late, trying to keep the country together. I figured the least I could do is wait up and kiss him good night. The president smiled and entered the room, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. He turned around and sat on the edge of the bed, untied his black leather shoes, and tossed them on the floor. He flipped over onto his belly and began crawling up the satin sheets like a lizard. Amy smiled and turned her head to the side. I said a kiss good night, Mr. President. Maynard pulled the sheets down, exposing her bare legs below a short red silk negligee. He grasped her left foot, kissed her ankle, and began to nibble his way up her leg, tasting her perfect Korean skin. Mr. President, I'm not that kind of girl, she said in a mock Vivian Leigh voice, her chin lowered. Maynard looked up and grinned. You will be tonight. He continued working his way up her tensing body, up the negligee and to her dainty neck. Finally, she put her hands on his shoulders and pushed him backward slightly. The president scowled. What's the matter? I'm sorry, Chris, but for some reason that old secretary of yours just popped into my head. I thought we agreed not to talk about it. I admitted my mistake, and that was supposed to be the end of it. The First Lady sighed. I know, but sometimes it still bothers me. She brushed his cheek with the back of her hand. I know I wasn't the first girl in your life, Chris, but please tell me I'm the only. Maynard smiled and put his chin on her stomach. Of course, my love, you're the only. Amy wrapped her legs around his rib cage and resumed her faux Gone with the Wind voice. Then I suppose you may proceed with whatever intentions you have in mind, Mr. President. That concludes episode 26 of The Eagle Has Crashed. And next week we will finish up March of 2030. And as always, if you're interested in purchasing it, you can go to my publishing website, clearpeakpress.com. You can go to amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, as well as get it in ebook format from Smashwords, the Sony Store, the iTunes Store, and other retailers. Have a great week.